but I think that to discuss more thoroughly all other aspects of the description of heaven and earth and heaven and hell and what happens to the soul, this is such a deep and wide subject that it's going to need quite a lot of lengthy explanations. But I can refer you to a good book called The Bridge of Life, which you have in the library, which describes it. The Bridge of Life by Rav Tukachinsky. It's in English. Gesher HaChaim. Yes. Now, any other question?
I wanted to say that the United Nations today is only a charity organization for terrorists.
Okay. Yeah.
The other question I want to ask is, it says that you should love your neighbor as yourself. But it says it's also keep away from a wicked neighbor. So how can I know if he's good or if he's not good? So how can I judge him?
We have the judgment that we can take. We're fortunate is the judgment of the Torah. If we've got, let's say, a neighbor who is a criminal and does stealing, and also he's destructive, and he burns up valuables and of other people. So keep away from him. Move somewhere else. It's a very simple aspect. Also, let's say you want to raise up your family to keep to at least a certain minimum of human modesty, and you find that the neighbor there doesn't care, they go around in the nude or whatever, and therefore it's going to influence your children, keep away. Go somewhere else. You can still, as it were, don't go about condemning him if it's not going to help, because if you condemn him, he will only fight back. And also, we have the principle in life, don't judge another person until you're in his place. And maybe that's the way they've been raised. Or let's say you happen to live as a Jew in Israel next to a Muslim who has been nurtured on propaganda of hate against all Jews, especially the Jews who are, let's say, in the West Bank or something, or Jerusalem. And he only stays because he's got a place here or something, so he stays here. Maybe works for Jews, but at the same time he hates them, and he would like to kill them at the first opportunity. So it's advisable, sensible, keep away from him. Don't start getting involved with him, because the slightest provocation, he might attack you. So keep away. So there are all sorts of situations you've got to use sense, Just like you can be attacked physically, you can be attacked also with all your values of your family, and they will be corrupted by the neighbor, so go somewhere else. Anyway, what I would like to do today, as I also announced, whenever I always try, whenever I read the Parsha, that's over Shabbos, and I get further insights into it, to give you today, is it already recorded? Yeah. So I want to give you today, the subject of this series is the Golut and Geula, and especially the Golut of Yishmael. So I want to show you how good morning. I want to show you from yesterday's Parsha, which Maseh describes the journeys, we can call it, of the wandering Jew. Wandering with an A and wandering with an O. Yeah? We are wandering people. the Jew has often been termed as the eternal wanderer. So, the Parsha, which we read, says, these are the journeys of the children of Israel where they went out from the land of Egypt in the hand of Moshe and Aaron. And Moshe wrote, Et Mota'ehem, the way they went out from enslavement, Mitzrayim, from Egypt. Lamasehem, to go on their journeys, was on the mouth of Hashem. The journeys were directed by Hashem himself to allow the people to survive throughout their wandering towards the holy promised land. But then but these are their journeys according to the Exodus, according to the way in which they went out. So this immediately brings the question, why Moshe wrote down the Exodus, they're going out from Egypt and then going on the journey to the Holy Land, Api Hashem, but then it says it was the other way around. And then there follows the details of 42 places which they went to and then camped and went to the next place. It's all Api Hashem. So, first, all the commentators ask the question, then comes a very long passage, given the places where they went on the journey and then the places where they encamped. And it took 40 years from the exodus from Egypt till they were able to get into the land of Israel. From the time when they went out on the 15th of Nisan, they went out from Egypt, celebrated Pesach and so on, and then on the 10th of Nisan, 2 years later, they crossed the Jordan. That was the real entry into Eretz Yisrael. And they mention all the places. So first, as a side remark, the Rambam also discusses, like nearly all the commentators, what's the significance of such a long passage to describe each place where they went, their camp? You can follow most of it through if you go through the previous chapters of the Chumash. Not all of them are mentioned there, but nearly all of them, how they traveled. Why does it go over it in this manner? And then why is it called a different order twice as the introduction? So the Rambam makes the following quite important note. He says that people might say, how is it possible for a nation of 2 million people to travel through the desert and they were able to survive it? And we know, people later on will know what the Sinai desert is like. And they had so often had no water, and then says there were miracles. Well, who says there were all these miracles? You know, how did they manage? And that in earlier times, you know, the desert, whatever we do know, was a much more dangerous place, filled with wild carnivorous animals, dangerous animals, both scorpions and snakes, and also lions and others. And also they're few and far between the places where there's no oasis. It wasn't possible. So you'll find, interestingly enough, in later days, especially in the German biblical scholars, they were very efficient in denying the truth of the Bible. And they kept on saying all these named places and all these nations mentioned that some of them never existed, and they're all wrong. But it turns out through archaeology, that people who are really deep archaeologists, they noticed the more there are archaeological excavations, the more one sees the detailed accuracy of the Bible in all aspects, whether it's what happened in Egypt, what happened in the desert, the ancient nations. You find the greatest biblical scholars, for example, Albright, great non-Jewish biblical archaeologists, and how they describe it's marvelous how the Bible turns out to be accurate in so many aspects, even things which we denied. And the German scholars tried their best to deny it, but also by splitting up the text and cutting it up in different ways, producing what's known as the Rainbow Bible. So they decimated the whole of the Bible to demonstrate the inferiority of the Old Testament in comparison with the New Testament, the inferiority of all ancient Jewish sources. That's how it used to be. Came along archaeology and proved them wrong. And therefore you'll find, for example, it was denied 150 years ago there was ever such a thing as the Hittite Empire. And even in my time, it's going back 50 years ago when I visited the British Museum, a whole part of the British Museum, British Library is called there, was a depiction of Hittite civilization to disprove these previous archaeologists. So that was the ancient way of trying to disprove the Jewish sources, which can't be done anymore today. Archaeology has shown that these biblical critics, especially the German ones, who used the decimation of the Bible, well, they decimated the Jewish people, and they're great scholars, just that they like to even to decimate, to cut into pieces human bodies of Jews in order to so-called medical research. Yeah, that's the type of medical research in a murderous manner. This was preceded by a murderous approach to the Jewish Bible. And that has failed. But what we're faced with today we're faced with the extreme movement of hatred against everything Jewish, that the Muslims are trying their very best to destroy all artifacts and all excavations that prove Jewish presence. Not only the Temple Mount, where it's terrible, as you know, as you all know, that they keep on trying to destroy them, and the Jewish archaeologists, they have to go and sift through the rubbish that they throw out. In amongst the rubbish, they find bits and pieces that have been broken up by the destructive Arabs, who are doing their very best to destroy any type of evidence that was ever a temple in Jerusalem, for example. And they're trying to do the best all over Israel. And not every place where people think, oh, this was Jewish, they say, oh no, Jews. They say the Holocaust didn't exist, and the temple didn't exist, and Jewish history didn't exist. And you tell a lie often enough, that's the method they use. And it's interesting, it's already mentioned by David HaMelech when he describes the terrible type of cruelty of the Muslims. It's from chapter 120 of Tehillim, he refers to it, that they have a policy of telling lies in every aspect. Any agreements that were made, they will break it. The agreements are only made in order to break it. They are a people, there's a streak amongst them. They're good Muslims as well, I'm not saying. Moroccan Muslims are very good on the whole, the king also. And also even in our area, they're good Muslims also. But there's this streak amongst them which is so dangerous, and that's why it's difficult to be peace with them. As it says in Tehillim, when I speak peace, they really mean war. We know that. That's it. The Ani Shalom, Israel says, I believe in peace. When I speak about peace, Heiman Milchama. They only want peace in order to prepare themselves for further war. That's our situation today. That's what we're faced with. So also they're trying to destroy everything Jewish. So the Rambam says, this is mentioned clearly, if in future times people will come and say, well, it never happened, so we've got archaeological evidence that it did happen. That's as an aside. But as explained more deeply, it's clear that these 42 wanderings are also a premonition. After all, this goes as follows. This is a deep explanation of Motzahem L'Masehem and Masehem L'Motzahem, the reverse. We say like this. Unfortunately, when the people of Israel went out from Egypt, they accompanied them the mixed multitude. If you look carefully in the text of the Chumash, when it came to the sin of the golden calf, so Moshe Rabbeinu even was told, when he came down from the mountain, Shua said they worshipped the golden calf. And Hashem said to Moshe, Ki shechet amacha shelit Mitzrayim. Your people that you took out from Egypt have caused corruption. So it's like this. The 70 members of the family of Yaakov formed the basis for the growth of the people of Israel in Egypt. They still did have roots and traditions from their forefathers, who were the ones to establish the concept of the blessing that God gives. And Abraham was told, through you will bless all the families of the earth, if you will keep to the path of Hashem, to do righteousness and justice. And that was the hope. This would take place through Abraham, and originally to even both Yishmael and Yitzchak. Yishmael went a different way, and then both Yaakov and Esau, but Esau went a different way. So there, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov established this people in Egypt. But when the 10 plagues came, and even the magicians, they saw the hand of God. So many of them, they said, okay, we also believe in God now. And the magicians, the wise men of Paro, and many others, they said, we're going to join the people of Israel. That was the mixed multitude. And so Moshe Rabbeinu thought, if they want to come, why shouldn't they join? They believe in Hashem. They're willing to go with us into the desert. So he took them. So it was really, Moshe Rabbeinu was a great prophet, and he believed in the consolidation of his people to spread their teachings throughout the world. So why not? These people, many of them, were of the highest level of intelligence of Egyptian society, who joined him. That's, if you look carefully in the Chumash, it's hinted at. When they came to the third plague already, most of the so-called magicians, and some of them were prominent scientists, as we know from today, from what they achieved. And the wise men of Pharaoh, they said, look, Pharaoh's going the wrong way by not letting the people go, not giving them full freedom, because they do came true. You see, they've got a true God. So they joined, but they hadn't yet released themselves entirely from the concept that we could only reach God through a medium. And the medium used to be the animals. These, as we know, even from Egyptian history. So therefore they thought the golden calf, this might be the means when Moshe didn't come. So well, we do need a medium to bring us to God. So it's Chishachet Amcha. And they enticed the rest of the people to join them. But they were the ones who promoted this sin of the golden calf. And then there's the Eruv Ra. And also, if you go through the whole history of the wandering, we see almost constantly there was a group that said, let's go back to Egypt. So they felt sometimes when they were left starving, and they were left without water, and they had to go through some of the difficulties in the desert, one of their first reactions was, it was better in Egypt. And some of them, they affected also quite a lot of the Jews, who were even properly descendants of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. They were affected by them very much. And they said, we left a land which was where we could have meat and have all good things, and you're taking us here to this place where there's nothing. So they lost their trust in Hashem. And therefore, a lot of them, if you also study carefully the wanderings of the people in the desert, sometimes it's getting nearer to the promised land, and frequently it was going away from the promised land. Many of them were going backwards. But it depended a lot on the extent to which the people were willing to fulfill the true dream of entering Eretz Yisrael. And the reason why it could have been done, even the sages say, Hashem said when he redeemed the people, I'll take you on eagle's wings, I'll take you to Sinai to receive the Torah, and from there I'll take you straight away into the Holy Land with great miracles. But the people weren't ready. They were sinned shortly after receiving the Torah, when Moshe Rabbeinu, that you couldn't wait for him a bit longer to come down with the tablets of stone. Meanwhile, they relapsed, and therefore even Hashem, I'm giving up these people altogether. I'm going to make you people from Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe refused. With no account, there'd be a desecration of the name of Hashem. In the end, Hashem relented. He said, well, I'll give you a second chance. They put the second bucha. So that was really the first relapse. They had to do teshuvah before they could carry on. They went backwards and forward. So there were some of them in this movement from Egypt to Israel, from Promised Land. Some of them went out from Egypt to go on the journey to the destination. And some of them, even when they were journeying toward the destination, but they turned their backs to the destination and wanted to go back to Egypt. That's why it says, Al Pi Hashem, it was Motzaim Nemasehem. But in fact, it became lengthened, and lengthened most of all with the sin of the spies. The sin of the spies was also looking at the future of the people of Israel according to not Torah concept. According to concept belongs to the world without Torah, without Hashem. You think you're going to go to that? Because they were told in the land of Israel, Hashem will expect you to earn your own food. You'll have to plow and harvest. You have to work hard, economically, agriculturally, and even military. You've got to do your part, and Hashem will always help you. But on the condition that you know it's not your own strength, it all comes from Hashem. If you reckon it all comes from Hashem, then go ahead. You have to be willing to fight if necessary for defense, and maybe you can fight in a manner there'll be no losses of life. If you do it in that manner, you'll have to do hard work, and you have great blessing coming from Hashem. But if you think it's kochi v'otzem yadi, it's my own power that's achieved it, like generally people do in a nation, they think they're victorious and they're successful economically. Look, we are the nation that has produced such greatness, and you pride yourself on it, and you forget about Hashem, then you'll be banished from the land. Then you have to go to exile to learn the lesson. And you'll have to go in the wanderings again. And therefore, if in the Chumash, it does state that if the people of Israel do not keep to the path of blessing from below and recognize it comes from Hashem, then you'll have to go through the path of curse and go from nation to nation. You'll be spread out all over the world, and you have to go wandering, not through the Sinai desert. You have to go wandering in the desert of all the populations of this earth. You'll go from place to place, and you'll have no settled life anymore. The Jews will come to a place and find a certain success. They'll forget about Hashem. Then Hashem will see to it they'll be driven out to another land, and you'll never be settled. And you can only become settled in Eretz Israel if you learn to come back to the soul of Israel. You can come back to the soil of Israel. But if you don't reach that level, then you have to go on. Even if you had established a kingdom, the kingdom will collapse, and the superpowers will take you over, the movement of hatred that will drive you from place to place. And if you look in the Chumash carefully, it describes what a Jewish history of the wandering Jew who never gets settled. And even now, many Jews come to the land of Israel, and then they see, well, we're not staying in this land, they go and get lost in America or somewhere else. So it's a procedure. You'll only be settled in the land of Israel if you become there the nation and the land that worships Hashem and declares Hashem's path to the rest of the world. And if you're not a model for the nation of the world, then instead of being a light to the nations, it'll be darkness for the Jews. And that situation continues until this day. It was thought after the Holocaust, that's the end. Now the Jewish people, we can defend ourselves, go into our own land, and we won't be dependent upon others. We're not dependent on others. We're entirely dependent on others, physically speaking. From the point of view of military support, point of view of diplomacy, we know quite well if we're not going to get military support from the superpowers, we're finished. If we're not going to enter into all forms of diplomacy and making compromises, then we're lost. And if we don't keep to our truth, which is the truth of Hashem, the land will be swamped by the falsehoods which are presented, that you can make the name of Israel and even announce the name of Israel, even take all the symbols of Israel, but if you deny the existence of God, despite all these things surrounding you, you're not really Israel. Because Israel means that God rules, not that man rules. Not your Declaration of Independence is, the Rock of Israel, meaning to them, not God. Because that's the only way they allowed that expression. They even want to leave out the expression Rock of Israel. But the agnostics, the atheists could say Rock of Israel means an enormous power of the nation. It's the nation that's produced it. It all comes from the nation. Otherwise, you're going here, the concept of extreme nationalism, like Israel above all the other nations, is stronger than the other nations. Well, it's assimilation to the concept of Deutschland über alles. The taking hold of the widespread nationalistic movements all over the world that think that their nation is above all others. Used to be Deutschland über alles, today it's Iran über alles, or America über alles. We are not über alles. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will make you Elyon, he'll make you above all the nations if you recognize the Koach Elyon, you recognize Hashem. We are here, it's not we ourselves. If you say it's my power that's produced this greatness, then you are destroying your power, Hashem says. That's what you do. You know you're the smallest of the nations. And if you don't realize, the nation of the world will make sure that you're the smallest of the nations. So that's right. Because that's how Hashem rules the world. Because the people of Israel, we've got to strengthen our Kol Yaakov, the voice of Israel. The voice of Israel is that God rules. So we describe also even that's the significance of the struggle of Yaakov with the mystical power of Esau. So this is reflected in this passage. Yirmiyahu says, you're going to go into exile now because you didn't keep your covenant with Hashem. The 10 tribes are lost, the remaining tribes are being banished to Bavel, and the Jewish people are going to get out of this land. And what will you have to do amongst the other nations? You have to pursue peace with them. You have to work out a method whereby you show a peaceful image to all the nations of the world. Well, that's the way in which you can raise up the banner that God rules the world. And don't try and make out amongst the other nations that you're the strongest nation in the world. Make peace with them. Compromise. Like Yaakov Avinu was able to make peace with Esau by all the appeasement he used. And Yirmiyahu says, you will have to go into the Midbar Ha'amim, the desert of the nations of the world. And the aspects mentioned in that long parsha, they refer to the tribulations of the people of Israel, not just in the desert of Sinai, but in the future deserts that might take place. The desert of the wandering Jew, be it the Jew who wanders all over what's today called the lands of Islam, the lands of the Middle East, under the Sultan and others. So you'd have your ups and downs, some is persecution, or whether it be the wanderings of the people of Israel in the lands of Europe, from one nation to the other. You'll be banished from Spain, Spanish jewelry will disappear. And Spanish jewelry became the greatest jewelry when Babylon disappeared as a Jewish center. And then when Spain disappeared, Jewish center, so Poland and Germany took over. And then afterwards, when Germany and Poland started doing pogroms and persecuting, annihilating Jewish communities, so then you can start a Jewish community in America, and who knows what's going to happen to American Jewry? If you think that's the ultimate salvation, but we know there are ups and downs there as well. I mean, the Dashers, they wanted Baruch Hashem, it was enough when they attacked. It was really an attack on Jews and those who believe in the values of the Jews was the 9/11 attack. But you know, what's going on today with nuclear means and even chemical warfare in the hands of many terrorist organizations, and those terrorists don't care committing suicide, it's a very risky situation. So what's going to happen? So this is the wanderings that are mentioned here, also the wanderings of the Golut. But what is the root of it all? It's the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude. There was a mixed multitude came out of Egypt. Meanwhile, Jews themselves, many of them, they've been so much affected by the culture and the lack of religion, or the false religion, or the lack of belief in God altogether, that has developed amongst the nations what has affected Jewish communities as well. A big part of the communist movement was a Jewish movement. These are Jews which became, as it were, part of the Erev Rav, before the coming of the Mashiach. We have the same situation. They are the weakest aspect of the Jewish people, what's left of them. And the Jewish people, we have to work in this direction. So therefore, we have a movement towards the destination, especially after the Holocaust. The movement began very much towards going back to Eretz Israel, and also towards going back to our roots, to the roots of the Jewish people. But unfortunately, this is just, in comparison with the tide of assimilation, it's just a trickle, not a tide yet. It's got to become a strong tide to make a change for the Jewish people as a whole. And there we have some going towards the destination, and some going back to the sickness of the Golut. So this is mentioned also here in this parsha. And that's why many commentators, Midrashim, also say this wandering backwards and forwards is reflected in, like I said, the sin of the Meraglim, of the spies, that they didn't believe in the higher mission of the people of Israel and the land of Israel. That is something that has accompanied us till the coming of Mashiach, and it's accompanied us today as well. There are not enough people amongst the Jews who are doing teshuvah in the fullest sense to recognize we've got to get back to our home, our physical home and our spiritual home. Therefore there's two movements amongst the Jewish people. One is towards Torah, and the other one is towards assimilation. One is towards love of the land of Israel, and some of it is to be anti-Israel, like BDS. This is the situation. It's a very, very serious matzah we're in today, and it's reflected in the 40 years wandering in the desert, and these 42 stations are reflected in the different stages of the long Golut. So I'm going to just give you also the way in which some of the ups and downs, both of Jews as individuals and of the Jewish people, are reflected in the names, even the names that are given to the places. So if you look amongst these 42 journeys and encampments, so it says in verse 14, it said they went away from Alush and they camped in the Refidim, and there's no water for the people to drink. So sages say, Refidim means Rafu Yedehem. Their hands became weak in attachment to Torah, because they had to prepare themselves to receive the Torah. Instead of that, instead of drinking those spiritual waters, they said, we're not interested. So also had no physical waters. But then they decided, right, we're low down. We're unfortunately so far removed, let's strengthen ourselves to prepare ourselves for the Torah. So it's Vayisum Refidim. So they moved away from Refidim, so it was really a journey in the right direction. Instead of being weak in attachment to the teachings of Hashem, they strengthened themselves. And then they were able to encamp even in the desert. Which desert? The desert of Sinai. So They've got the desert of Sinai. This is a reference, when they camped there, they had the revelation from Hashem to 3 million of the people of the 10 commandments, of the Decalogue. So it gave them great strength, great encouragement. But they were there for a time, and they were on a very high level. But then, after 40 days, they were Sinai, they heard the Torah, but they went astray. Why did they go astray? Why did they serve the idol? What really lay behind it? It says they encamped in the burial ground of materialistic desire. Kivrot ha'ta'ava. Why did they go away? Torah was very nice. They'd had this huge revelation, reaching almost the level of prophecy. And then came also the Egyptians. They said, look, Moshe Rabbeinu hasn't come. Let's make the golden calf. But when they made the golden calf, well, it was idolatry. We should know the root of idolatry is not so much that people really believe that something made of metal, of gold, or whatever it's made of, that can really change your life. But they use a symbol to say gold and silver, including also food and drink, and merrymaking, and have fun, is much more enjoyable than serving Hashem. So that people become buried in their ta'ava and their materialistic desires. Be a desire for money, like golden calf, be a desire for all forms of wealth, be a desire for food and drink, be a desire for licentiousness. So there it says when Moshe came down from the mountain, it says he saw the calf, or mocholot, he saw the dancing, and the way they were celebrating the golden calf, that now they can be loose in their sexual behavior, and they can enjoy themselves, and that buried them. So the Jewish people were buried, and Hashem said to Moshe Rabbeinu, this is no longer the people of Israel, and therefore I can't go on with them. And I want this world to become a place where they recognize Hashem. Yeah, and you can have enjoyment. It's got to be in the service of Hashem, not the service of the golden calf. And you recognize that one of the ta'avot that lie amongst this people of Israel, they easily get influenced by it, is money. Jews want to get rich. That's a taiva, to get rich, become powerful. And unfortunately, that aspect is following us until today. A lot of people will do with a bit of swindling to become rich, or they will oppress many workers, exploit them in order they can become rich. So this is part of the kivrot hatava. But when they went away from kivrot hatava, it says they encamped in chatzirot. Chatzirot are courtyards. So it's the concept. They say chatzirot is a concept to recognize. Even if you're top of the Forbes list, even if you're the richest man in the world, when it comes, however, to the end of life, nothing goes with you. Like I read before, what's the soul? All that remains is the soul. And whatever you've achieved in fulfilling materialism, be it a lot of companies, being huge estates, being the richest man in the world, or in having transient fun and orgies, parties, day after day. In the end, what do you have in the end? In the end, you've got the highest. You've got the human soul. Now, how do you reach that? How can you reach that end that you've got the human soul? It's only if you know that this world is a corridor. It's only a place of preparation to go to the true banqueting hall, it says in the Ethic of the Fathers. The banqueting hall where you have the highest enjoyment above anything that you have in this world is the enjoyment of the soul. But it's not like the Korean paradise that in future life you'll have 70 of the most beautiful virgins in the world, and you'll have any food that you want, any possessions that you want. It's nothing. It doesn't exist in the heavenly world, as we know today from science, scientific records. We know that the soul lives in a dimension where there's greater happiness than anything you can have in this world, because it's beyond the material world. That's the greatest, the highest. That comes when you recognize this world is a corridor. So that gets rid of drowning in the burial ground of Tava. And then, but sometimes people go away from that concept. And that is when Yachanu B'ritma. So Rashi already been, so what's Ritma mean? Is the Ritma is called the broom tree. There's a broom tree growing there. The broom tree produces the coal, produces the plants. You can transform it to charcoal, but the charcoal that it produces is ritmo. Ritmo, they produce glowing coals. On the outside, they don't seem to be glowing, but inside they're glowing. And this is mentioned chapter 120 of Tehillim, when it refers to the power of falsehood, of ritma, of the lashon ramia, the use of lies. And chapter 120 is a chapter that characterizes the lying policy of Islam. Referred to, the Rambam says that we can't stand their lies. The Muslims base themselves upon falsehood in their hate propaganda against the Jewish people. And this has been apparent in the ups and downs of Islam. There have been some periods where they've been honest, but there's a streak in them of wildness that expresses itself from developing false propaganda. And there's more that hurts in our time also produced. Oyuli kigati meshech, shachanti bolei kedai. It says in Tehillim that I'm living amongst the Bedouins, which were the bases. The Bedouins came from that same source, the culture of Yishmael. They based themselves on telling lies, on making contracts that they only sign in order to be untrue to them, not to fulfill them. That's their policy. And that's referred to as gachali tamim. There are coals that are dangerous. They hide it. And then, but underneath, it's red hot, ready to kill. They go underground. They want to hide it for a time, but it seems there's nothing much going on. But underground, they prepare the destruction of Israel. And they use all forms of falsehood. They destroy artifacts non-stop. So that is, but where does it come from? It comes because we ourselves speak Lashon Hara. Okay, the Chet HaMeraglim. This reference in the Midbar was the Chet HaMeraglim, Prus Ritma, where in this place Ritma, that's the place where they said we don't want to go to Eretz Israel because it's too strong for us, and they told lies about Eretz Israel. Some of the lies had a truth attached to them. Yeah, there were giants there, but they left out the power of God, who was willing and promised He will help us. If we leave our God, then unfortunately it'll be taken over by the enemies. But if you bring God into it and trust Him and know that He is the one who will look after your nation, then you will be victorious. So that's the important lesson we have to learn. Now there's a very interesting statement made by very many great philosophers of history in our time. There are very many philosophers of history, and even those who began as complete secularists, they say there's no way we can explain Jewish history unless we assume there's a divine power bringing about the survival of the Jews. And to some extent even recognized by Toynbee, one of the greatest philosophers of history in our time. But if you read what he writes about the Jews, how great they are and how terrible they are, it recognizes the Jews are a riddle. How are they able to survive? But certain Nicholas Badiaev, who was an atheistic philosopher, in his meaning of history, he became not just a believer, we see God in the history of the Jews. John McMurray, great British philosopher, he wrote Golut history from the history of the Jewish people. And when I was a youngster, the writings of H.G. Wells, mainly more scientific writings, but he was an agnostic. He wrote Short History of the World, and he writes there, we cannot explain the survival of the Jewish people unless we assume there's some supernatural power that is helping them to survive on account of the Torah they have in their hands. And this being recognized more and more by many historians, also very great French historians. So this is also mentioned by Yaakov Emden, who says, all the miracles that exited Egypt demonstrate the power of Hashem in the past. But he says in the present, he lived 200 years ago, what a greater evidence for God's providence over mankind. And that is if we study Jewish history. And we see there's no way you can explain the survival of this nation. There were so many attempts to put Haman's vision to utterly destroy every Jew and Jewess in the world, culminating in the Holocaust. And in the end, the Jews survived. They continue to survive. And therefore, we will also certainly survive the present crisis. Since many of the others we even read about them, if you go more deeply into the Chumash and the prophets, that they have happened. So surely, we're soon going to see, after the greatest darkness of the night, which comes just before the dawn, Mitzvah Hashem will see the arrival of all the Jewish people in the land of Israel, with the coming of the Mashiach, building the temple, and making peace amongst all mankind. Yitzhak Hashem B'Kol.
Well,